Most people believe change is a matter of willpower. Neuroscience suggests something far more unsettling. Willpower alone almost never rewires the brain. People exhaust themselves trying to force transformation through effort, discipline, and resistance, only to fall back into the same chemical loops of anxiety, craving, and self-sabotage. And this is where everything changes. Ancient biblical wisdom contains a precise neurobiological mechanism modern science is only beginning to understand. In the next few minutes, the veil between spiritual practice and brain architecture will dissolve. What emerges is a method capable of rebuilding the mind from within. The concept of change is often sold as a simple matter of decision, yet the biological reality of the human brain suggests a far more complex and rigid structure. For decades, the prevailing scientific consensus viewed the adult brain as a static machine, a finished product that merely accumulates data until it eventually degrades. This perspective created a profound sense of existential stagnation. It suggested that once a personality or a set of trauma-informed habits was formed, the individual was essentially a prisoner of their own neural circuitry. But here is what most people never realize. The emergence of neuroplasticity has shattered this deterministic model. It reveals that the brain is a living, breathing landscape. It is constantly rewiring itself based on the signals it receives from the environment and the internal world of thought. In this light, the ancient biblical command to meditate day and night ceases to be a mere religious suggestion. It reveals itself as a sophisticated manual for cognitive engineering. The Hebrew word often translated as meditation is haggah. This term implies much more than silent reflection or the modern pursuit of an empty mind. It describes a process of deep pondering, muttering, and imaginative rehearsal. Essentially, it is directing a concentrated stream of information into the neural pathways. When a mind engages in this repetitive, focused intensity, it is not just thinking in the abstract. It is physically sculpting the white and gray matter of the brain. This realization shifts the entire understanding of spiritual discipline into the realm of biological necessity. Here, the words spoken and the images held in the mind act as the primary architects of the self, and that should disturb you or empower you. As this internal process deepens, the psychological implications move beyond simple habit formation into the territory of identity reconstruction. Science shows that the brain activates overlapping neural networks, whether a person is experiencing something physically or vividly imagining it. It fires the same neurons and releases similar neurotransmitters in both scenarios. By saturating the consciousness with specific, high-stakes principles, the individual begins to bypass the critical filters of the conscious mind. This creates a state of internal tension. The old, entrenched neuropathways, the highways of fear, lack, and reactive behavior, begin to lose their electrical dominance. The struggle is no longer against the outside world. It is a systemic reordering of the internal hierarchy. Yet this expansion carries an inherent uncertainty. The destruction of the old self is a prerequisite for the birth of the new. This is the hidden cost. It leads to a state of neurological instability that most people find terrifying. A profound contradiction lies at the heart of human transformation. Why is it that some people can recite affirmations for years with no visible change, while others experience a total psychological shift in a single moment of crisis? This discrepancy suggests that the brain is not always open for business. It possesses a hidden gatekeeper that only permits deep rewiring under very specific conditions. Science identifies these moments as neuroplasticity windows. These are brief intervals where the brain becomes exceptionally malleable. Imagine iron heated to a glowing orange in a blacksmith's forge. At room temperature, the metal is rigid and unyielding, but under the pressure of intense heat, its very molecular structure becomes willing to take on a new form. This is the hidden mechanism. This state of heightened sensitivity is often triggered by novelty, intense emotional stakes, or a sense of urgent transition. When the environment becomes unpredictable or the internal pressure reaches a breaking point, the brain releases a cocktail of neurochemicals, such as norepinephrine and acetylcholine. These chemicals signal the nervous system to pay absolute attention. This is the Joshua moment described in ancient texts. A leader is commanded to rewire his mind precisely when he is most overwhelmed by the prospect of war and giants. It implies that the most stressful and uncertain periods of life are not obstacles to change. In fact, they are the only times when structural change is truly possible. The mystery deepens when one considers that most people spend their entire lives avoiding the very discomfort required to trigger this neuroplasticity. By seeking comfort and safety, they inadvertently keep their brains in a cold state. New ideas merely slide off the surface of old, hardened habits. If you desire a new reality, you must be willing to step into a state of high-stakes vulnerability. The threshold of change is guarded by the very anxiety that humans are programmed to flee. Only those who move toward the fire of uncertainty can ever hope to be forged into something greater. To understand how a singular habit restructures the human experience, we must view the subconscious mind as an invisible, self-regulating system. This system operates largely beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. It acts as a complex biological software that manages everything from autonomic functions to reflexive emotional responses. It is a massive network of neural highways paved over decades of repetition. Within this framework, biblical meditation is not an act of learning. It is a deliberate attempt to hack the source code of this invisible system. It is a systematic effort to introduce a new set of instructions into a machine that is programmed to resist interference. The old brain will fight back. This model of reality shaping suggests that the human eye does not see the world as it is, but rather as the brain has been programmed to perceive it. The prefrontal cortex and sensory processing centers act as filters. They discard millions of bits of information every second to present a simplified version of reality that aligns with your internal biases. If the internal programming is set to survival or fear, the brain will actively seek out evidence of threat. It reinforces the existing neuropathways in a self-perpetuating loop. However, when an individual engages in the specific biblical habit of guarding the mouth and the mind, they are practicing a form of sensory deprivation against the old system. Simultaneously, they flood the new system with high-frequency data. This creates a perception-shaping model. The perception of opportunity dramatically changes, altering behaviors and outcomes, simply because the brain's filtering mechanism has been recalibrated to notice truths that were previously invisible. At the level of behavioral programming, this shift is manifested through the activation of the motor and language centers. When the ancient texts command that the word should not depart from the mouth, they are tapping into a neurological reality. Speaking is significantly more demanding than thinking. The act of vocalization requires the coordination of the respiratory system, the vocal cords, and the complex motor functions of the tongue and lips. Meanwhile, the auditory cortex processes the sound of one's own voice. This multisensory engagement forces the brain to dedicate a massive amount of metabolic energy to the thought being expressed. It is a biological reinforcement mechanism. It makes the new thought heavier and more real than the silent, ghostly whispers of the old identity. Each time a principle is spoken aloud with conviction, it is a heavy hammer striking the neural forge. It deepens the groove of the new pathway, while the old, neglected roads begin to wither through a process known as synaptic pruning. This integration of psychology and mysticism becomes even more compelling when examined through a Jungian lens. Jung spoke extensively of the shadow and the self, the internal archetypes that govern behavior from the unconscious. Biblical meditation can be understood as bringing the light of conscious truth into the darkness of the subconscious shadow. It is a confrontation between the person you have been conditioned to be and the person you were divinely intended to become. This is not a gentle process. It is a controlled, mystical experience. You are using the word as a psychological scalpel to excise limiting beliefs. By identifying with a higher, transcendent truth, the individual provides the brain with a stable, high-altitude perspective. This neutralizes the cortisol-driven reactivity of the lower brain. The sophisticated nature of this habit is revealed in its demand for absolute focus, not turning to the right or the left. In information theory, this is the reduction of noise to enhance the signal. The brain has finite resources. Every time attention is divided, the neural energy is dissipated. The rewiring process slows to a crawl. By maintaining a singular obsessive focus, the individual induces a state of long-term potentiation. The synaptic connections between neurons become permanently strengthened. This is the biological equivalent of a spiritual stronghold being built. Not one of fear, but one of unwavering certainty and power. It is the moment where the habit ceases to be something you do and becomes the foundation of who you are. This neurotheological shift explains why courage is the primary prerequisite. To stay focused on a new internal truth while the external world still reflects the old reality requires a temporary suspension of belief in the senses. This is the mystical walk of faith, translated into neurological terms. Over time, the brain's internal model becomes more dominant than the external input. You no longer react to the giants in the land. You respond to the neural architecture you have meticulously constructed in the secret place of your own mind. This is the ultimate integration of spirit and biology, truly unbound. This process of deep integration eventually leads to an emergent self. As the new neural networks become the path of least resistance, behaviors that once required immense effort, such as discipline, peace, and courage, become automatic and reflexive. The individual no longer has to try to be strong. They simply are strong because their brain can no longer compute the alternative. The old self has not just been suppressed, it has been biologically overwritten. This is the prosperity and success promised in ancient texts. Not a magical gift from the sky, but the inevitable output of a brain that has been perfectly calibrated for the environment it was intended to conquer. The deeper the meditation, the more profound the shift. Every person carries an invisible burden, a set of repetitive patterns that seem to sabotage their highest intentions without their consent. There is a common experience of waking up with the firm resolve to be different, only to find oneself sliding back into the same ruts of irritability, procrastination, or silent despair. This is the limbic hijack. This creates a persistent state of emotional fatigue. It is a quiet exhaustion that comes from fighting a war against your own nervous system. It is the frustration of a cortisol loop, where your body is physically addicted to the very stress you are trying to escape. This internal disconnection is not a flaw of character. It is a symptom of a brain running an outdated and defensive operating system. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward a profound psychological awakening. There is a specific kind of mental pressure that builds when the internal identity is at odds with daily actions. It feels like a subtle background humming of anxiety, a sense that something is fundamentally wrong even when life appears stable. These thought loops are like ghosts in the machine. They echo the fears of the past into the present moment. Most individuals live their entire lives within these invisible walls. They never realize that the walls are actually physical structures within their own minds, entrenched neuropathways reinforced by years of silent, unconscious agreement. And that should disturb you. The emotional recognition of this struggle is often accompanied by a sense of isolation. Yet this is a universal human dynamic, the fundamental tension between the biological drive for safety and the spiritual drive for expansion. The silent internal disconnection you feel is the soul's reaction to being confined within a neural architecture that is too small for its potential. To acknowledge this struggle is to finally stand at the threshold of the forge. The old way of being is no longer sufficient for the journey ahead. The path toward a renewed mind is not found in a sudden burst of inspiration. It is found in the quiet, persistent observation of the internal world. It begins with the simple act of noticing the thoughts that arise without judgment, recognizing them as mere electrical signals rather than absolute truths. This shift in awareness allows for a space to emerge between a stimulus and the reaction, a sacred interval where a new choice can be made. Over time, this practice of self-observation reveals the subtle influence of the subconscious on every perception. The transformation is a gradual process of reclaiming the territory of the mind, one neuron at a time. As the focus shifts from the external chaos to the internal order, the brain begins to mirror this new clarity. It is an ongoing journey of alignment, where the ancient principles of wisdom become the new lens through which all of reality is interpreted. Most people stop here. Don't. This steady expansion of awareness is the true beginning of a life lived in freedom. The ancient structures of the mind are not moved by casual thought. They are moved by the relentless weight of a soul that has decided to stay awake. When the principles of a higher reality are hammered into the neural forge through constant focus and speech, the very nature of one's existence begins to shift. The giants of the past lose their power, not because they have vanished, but because the mind has grown large enough to encompass them without fear. Transformation is the quiet victory of the signal over the noise. It is the moment when the biological and the spiritual become a single, unwavering flame. In the silence of the rewiring brain, a new world is born. The mind is no longer a prison, it is the architect's greatest tool.